Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today we want to talk about another Minisforum NAS solution, but this is arguably their biggest, beefiest solution to date. This is the Minisforum N5 Max, a NAS that we've already spoken about a few times this year since the first time we saw it at CES 2026. The TLDR, this thing is absurdly OP. Rocking out with an AMD Ryzen, the 395 Plus, that CPU 16-core 32-thread with 8060S graphics, also arrives with 64 gig of 8000 mega transfers LPDDR5X memory, also rocking out with a couple of 10 gig NICs, a couple of 80 gig USB 4 V2 or Thunderbolt 5 connections alongside standard USB 4. It also arrives with that chassis, metal on the outside, a removable base panel for maintenance, troubleshooting and upgrades, as well as those 5 SATA bays inside, accompanied with multiple M.2 NVMe bays on the base. This thing is bonkers in its capability. It lacks a few things of the N5 Pro, and we'll get to that later on, but ultimately this is sort of the standard to beat for AI NAS right now. No, wait, come back. I know I said AI, but there are users that are looking at deploying AI services on a NAS system. That's what this is designed for. This is designed to not only store all of your data, but also run an AI agent. Hell, run local LLM services or connect to a remote one and use human language and devices that you want to use day to day in order to control it. Now, alongside all of that, remember that prefix memory inside there, we also have to acknowledge that because of that 64 gig of RAM, the price for this device is listed at $2,899. Look, where are you going? Come back. Look, I get it. I really do. It's a lot of money, and if you've looked at the price of storage media these days, that is not a small hill to mount. But realistically, with the cost of RAM these days, we've got to at least give them the benefit of the doubt. The fact that it isn't so dim inside is going to annoy some. But let's actually talk about this device, the capabilities, what you actually are getting for the money, what you're not getting for your money, and ultimately, whether the N5 Max deserves your money and your data. So first up, let's talk about the design and the storage. I've already mentioned the chassis in previous N5 reviews. This is the metal one. It weighs in at about 5 kilograms. As mentioned, there's the storage bays there on the front, each one of them supporting a 2.5 or 3.5 inch media drive. It's SATA, not SAS. I will say this front panel, of the 3 devices, it's my least favorite that we've talked about here on the channel, because it's not really transparent in any way, and I've even managed to scratch it in the brief period of time that this has been here around the offices at NAS Compares. Alongside that, of course, there is the modular removable bay that I've already talked about. Carrying on the subject of storage, not only have we got those 5 storage bays for SATA, but we have got 5 M.2 NVMe bays inside. This is technically a 10-bay storage system. One of the M.2s is a Gen 4 x 4, 2280 length, and the other 4 are 2280, but they are Gen 4 x 1. So that is, again, you're looking at full Gen 4 x 4 performance at around 6 to 7 gigabytes on one of those, and the others, you're looking around 1.6 to 1.7 gigabytes transfer speed inside. But alongside that, in terms of design, we've got 5 individual fans based around the system, 2 on the rear of the chassis. We'll talk about the ports and connections in just a wee moment. On top of that, you have got 2 top-mounted fans on top of a 5-point coiled heat array on top of the CPU and the RAM going into an air vent chamber. And on the other side, we have an additional fan here, where that is based on top of the other 2 M.2 NVMe slots. Also, you see this panel here? This is our internal PSU. This doesn't have an external chunky power brick. This device runs clean off that internal PSU straight into, quite surprisingly, a cloverleaf power connector. It's unusual to see that one on the rear of a NAS chassis, but still, fair play, I like it. In terms of ports and connectivity on this device, we've already sort of covered the mainline bits of it. There's some, 10 gig USBs on there and HDMI, which is always nice. Put that tray back later. But I will say it's quite nice that the front mounted port here is a USB Type 4, and it's the rear ones, those high performance ones, those 80 gig USBs. We've already tested direct connectivity. We did a whole video about it. You can directly connect to this in the Miniscloud OS, allowing you to get some pretty astonishing speeds. I was able to directly connect my MacBook for M4 Once I connected it with this device, I was able to achieve conventionally 2.5 to 3 gigabytes. Then with larger block styles or with going for something a little bit more sequential, I got it as high as 4 gigabyte and peaking at 5.5 gigabytes per second read. Again, that was synthetic, maybe not going to be indicative of day-to-day operations, but still, the fact that I've got a direct connection via USB 4 V2 or Thunderbolt 5 to get that performance, and there are 2 ports inside there, and you can assign them as separate Thunderbolt connections. And you can do the same thing with the front mounted port to get around 1.5 to 1.7 gigabytes per second transfer speed, direct connections. And that's not even factoring in the 2 10 gig NICs that I've mentioned there. That is beautiful. Although I will also highlight, there is no PCIe upgrade slot. The compromise has clearly been here with a 16-lane Gen 4 CPU inside there that they have pretty much batted 100 to cover everything, and there is no PCIe upgrade slot in there. The only other things you'll find inside is a USB upgrade slot there that you can use for your operating system. And while we're on the subject of the operating system, I am pleased to confirm that the Miniscloud OS, just like before, arrives on an SSD inside this system. But notwithstanding it's got 5 M2 slots inside, so even if you lose one, you've still got 4 others. It is delivered with a 2280 length M.2 SSD inside. So at the very least, you haven't got that weird little junky 64 gig tiny M.2 at 2230. Also, it's the tiniest thing. They finally introduced lockable trays on here. I don't know why the previous generation didn't have lockable trays. Anyone that takes their data seriously alongside, ECC support, they're going to want lockable trays. I couldn't find any confirmation anywhere online that this device, the RAM inside, is traditional ECC. Everything I looked online said that the CPU should be capable of that, but until I'm proved otherwise, and I went in to the command line, and again, I couldn't find confirmation that this is ECC memory inside here. So unless I hear otherwise, and I'll put a disclaimer on screen or pin it a note in the bottom, assume it doesn't arrive with ECC. Alongside those storage bays there on the front, I will also say that the fans, or those mad number of fans I mentioned, you still can't control the fans from within the operating system. You can only do it within BIOS, and we'll talk about that during the noise testing on this. But still, it's still kind of annoying that given that the Miniscloud OS is built on their hardware, that they've not found a workaround to manually adapt those fans. It's still automatic, and it will scale up and scale down based on core temperatures inside. There's plenty of fans there, but I wish you could control the fans on something that arguably in close proximity with those direct cables could be problematic. That said, talking of noise is actually not that bad. I liked the noise levels generated from the previous generation N5s, and despite the increased fan array and arguably the increased hardware inside here, the noise levels are actually pretty darn similar. When I had the 5 hard drives inside, 3 M.2 NVMe's on one side of the bay there, because I kept the other one spare to do some other testing, and the system in idle, I only saw an audio level of around 38 to 41 dBA. Now, when I had the thing fully populated, again, same SSD, same hard drive array, but the system being accessed with read and write activity on the individual drives, I saw a noise level around 41 to 45 dBA. Now, what's interesting about that is, remember, there's no fan control inside there, and obviously the drives you choose to use will make a vast amount of difference. But what about when I wanted those fans to be on max? I went into BIOS and ramped everything up to the fans to go to their highest level, ignoring any of the sensors, and with all of the fans in operation, I still didn't see the decibel level go higher than about 47 to 48 dBA, when I've seen systems of a similar power and class and scale to this exceed 50 dBA easily. So fair play to them. Yes, I wish I could control those fans more, but at the very least, the noise level was actually not too shabby. And in terms of power consumption, I will say, yes, it's a more egregiously powerful CPU, and you should be aware of that. Obviously, again, the drives you choose to use will make a difference on the power consumption and draw from those drives. Always equate somewhere between 4 watt and 10 watt, depending on the capacity of your drives as you scale up. But I removed all of the storage, the hard drives, and just had the 3 M.2s that I had inside connected and the system running. I even removed the base panel from the whole array to get a nice baseline idle power consumption, and it went down to 29 to 30 watts. That's still pretty high for 3 M.2s inside, barely give them a watt each. That is still, 16 cores, 32 thread, and a lot of RAM already pre-soldered to the board. This was always going to be quite power hungry, notwithstanding all the cooling arrangements inside. The fans, only 2 of those M.2s I mentioned earlier on have got their own dedicated fan. The other 3 have actually got a large heatsink on top. This system is all about the cooling, baby. Now, when I had the hard drives installed inside, I went for quite aggressive drives, I will say, 24 to 30 TB drives, and 5 of those inside, alongside the 3 M.2s, with 2 active 10 gig connections, and the system being accessed there, and I saw with general access around 47 to 50 watts power draw there. But as soon as I started using the CPU, anything above 10 to 15, 20%, immediately that power consumption leapt into the 80s or 90s. This is a CPU that is ready to, crank it up at the drop of a hat, understandably so, given the architecture of the GPU, CPU, and MPU. I even talked about just how far you can push it, 126 tera operations a second. For you, AI users, that is a CPU that has, done its time. Look at Geekbench. You can look at the number of different systems that have been testing on a similar CPU, from Framework to GMK Tech, right the way back round to Minisforum. This is not a low-powered CPU. But again, just keep in mind that when it comes to the power consumption, if you're running 24/7 operations, or if you are going to run AI from this doing constant crawls, those power consumption numbers are going to creep up. In terms of performance, when I had hard drives in there and a RAID 5 array, this does with Miniscloud run on a ZFS platform, I saw performance of 700 to 800 megabytes per second. When I tweaked things, I could get up to full 10 gig NIC saturation. With the M.2s, I decided to try both SMB3 multi-channel with the 10 gigs there, and I saw performance on one of those Gen 4x1 M.2s comfortably saturating between 1.3 and 1.6 gigabytes per second. So again, reasonable numbers. But it was when I went in, as mentioned, with the USB 4 V2 connections that it really opened up the bandwidth for me to play with there. And again, we've made a whole video just about this and just why this, I believe this is the first Thunderbolt 5 NAS solution. I saw performance numbers there start out at around 2.7 gigabytes per second write, but in terms of read, I got it all the way up with tweaks up to 5.5 gigabytes per second there via the USB 4 connection. Now, when I had simultaneous access, I had the hard drives being accessed with a Windows PC and an M.2 being accessed via the Thunderbolt connection there. I saw both of them running perfectly well, as long as they are accessing different storage media at 800 over 500 for the hard drives and the Windows connected 10 gig machine, and 1700 over around 1000 to 1200 via the connected USB 4 Mac system there. So again, the individual storage areas, the only drive you're ever going to see full, massive, impressive saturation is going to be that Gen 4x4 drive inside. The rest of it, however, you're not going to see the full saturation because you just can't with 5 hard drives inside this over SATA. And the other M.2s on 4x1 means they're going to be pretty much restricted to 20 gigabits or realistically, again, 1.5 to 1.6 gigabytes per second. Which brings us to arguably the weakest part of this value proposition, which is the software. Now, that isn't to say that the Miniscloud OS that this arrived with is inherently bad. It actually isn't. It's quite fully featured, and a lot of it is the software level that allows you to take advantage of some of the direct USB connectivity on this, as well as some of the containerized applications and easy deployment, like some of that OpenClaw stuff that Minisforum have integrated natively into this software via the App Center as well. But there's still no avoiding that it just doesn't feel finished yet when you do utilize the Miniscloud OS. There's still several elements of it that say beta. A lot of the inconsistencies in the text display there, the regionalization there, and the localization, I should say, and some of the apps and services, when you do run them, they're still bouncing off of, different DNSs and different addresses that are still Chinese based because it is a Chinese OS. It's nothing to do with the hardware. It's developed in China. And a lot of the migration of that to the local deployment in the US or Europe or wherever, just some of that software is just in there. It's not leaking any information. It's not calling back. It's just general app stuff doing app stuff. Some of the designs of the apps and services, it still looks good. It's still user-friendly, but there's still the odd bell and whistle. You can't enable SSH on it. I didn't find an option. and it's still not there. And I've gone into the backlog of Minisforum posts and forums online, and there's still no way for me to just turn on SSH. I had to install a different SSD with Zimmer OS on board just to do the SSH stuff for this video. Some of the, the graphics, some of the apps and services, they just don't feel smooth. They don't feel integrated, and a lot of the hardware, as good as it is then let down ever so slightly by the software experience there. And some apps and services are still need things like test flight and downloading certain apps and services off of outside of official stores in order to get them working. Now, that isn't to say that you can't run a third-party OS. You can't crack on with Unraid, crack on with TrueNAS, hell, crack on with HexOS. But I think a lot of users, when they see a system like this, the value proposition isn't just the hardware. And again, as mentioned, if you do install a third-party OS, you're going to need the drivers in that OS, or at least the configuration, to take advantage of some of the features and services like that USB stuff. Some, like Zimmer OS, have got that built in that you can work around with some of the apps and services. But other ones like TrueNAS, it can be quite complicated to set that up, because TrueNAS doesn't like IPs getting pulled in and out in the same plug-and-play fashion as you find with USB. Ultimately, the Miniscloud OS is a good OS. It just doesn't feel finished. But realistically, I think most users that are looking at this, they're not buying it for that software. They're buying it for the hardware. And as a pre-built NAS solution, when you're looking at the CPU RAM configuration, when you're looking at the port and connectivity, when you are looking at 5 SATA, 5 M.2 NVMe, 20 gig networking, and everything else in between on this device, in this architecture, running as well and as cool as it does, you gotta love it. That said, it ain't cheap. So once you factor in buying your big pile of hard drives, once you factor in buying all of your M.2 NVMe's, you are looking comfortably at a 5 or 6 grand spend. So just know that this is an expensive box, even after you get outside of your initial purchase there. But it's still a box that I like. Now, I'm going to be coming back to this device and the N5 Air and the N5 AI Pro in about 6 months' time, because I want to see how these devices have been running. They're set off, you might have seen it when I was panning the camera around, 2 devices up there that are currently running through different processes. I want to see just how well these things do in terms of durability, because Minisforum, it's no longer a fringe NAS release. They are taking this seriously. Alongside the N series, they're also rocking out dedicated SSD flash solutions like the S5 and the S7. So I think we now have to take them a lot more seriously as a NAS solution in 2026 going into 2027. But nonetheless, this as a NAS is it's just quite expensive, and it can get quite power hungry. But let's talk about it more in that follow-up video. Let me know what you guys think. Is this the NAS that you've been waiting for? Is this making you think, the 500 Nika N5 Air is suddenly looking quite appealing? Let me know what you guys think below. Again, there's links in the description to get hold of different Minisforum NAS devices. If you want to support what we do, please use those links. We get a small commission, allows us to keep doing what we do. And of course, there's the free advice and support section over on NAS Compares, alongside the written review coming very, very soon, linked below. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.